The end of the friend distance. Welcome back to Kalen After Midnight. Tonight, let's talk about the blurred lines. We all have that one person, the one who fits into your life so seamlessly that you forget there ever was a time that they weren't there. You call them a friend because it's a safe word. It's a sturdy word. It's a word that protects the status quo. But what happens when that word starts to feel a little too small? When the usual routines start to carry a weight that they didn't have before? This is a story about the night we stopped pretending. It wasn't an explosion. It was a slow, quiet realization that the safety of friendship was no longer enough. We'd always been like this. Easy. Familiar. We were the kind of pair that made strangers at parties assumed we'd grown up in the same neighborhood or shared a decade of history. We had our routines down to a science. I knew exactly how you liked your coffee in the afternoon, and you knew exactly which shared jokes would pull me out of a bad mood. We had mastered the art of unspoken understanding, knowing that when the air needed words, and when it was better to let the silence do the heavy lifting. Friends. That word had been our anchor. It fit us like a favorite old sweater, worn in, comfortable, and reliable. And for a long time, that was plenty. Which is why I noticed the exact second it stopped being enough. It was late, much later than we usually stayed up on a Tuesday. The world outside was muffled by a light January rain, and the house had settled into that deep midnight quiet. The lights were dimmed down to just one lamp in the corner, casting a warm amber glow over the room. We were sitting on the floor, our backs against the base of the couch, half watching a rerun of a show we'd both already seen 3 times. You laughed at a line that wasn't particularly funny. It was a nervous, airy sound, not your usual deep chuckle. I looked over at you. The lamplight caught the side of your face, and I realized I was holding my breath. You okay? I asked. Yeah, you said, a little too quickly. You shifted your weight, then added more honestly. Just tired, I guess. But you didn't look tired. Your eyes were bright, focused. You looked aware, like you were suddenly noticing the texture of the carpet or the rhythm of my breathing. It was the look of someone who had been observing something for a long time and had finally run out of ways to ignore it. We had spent countless nights exactly like this, sharing snacks, sharing stories, sharing the kind of normal friend stuff that builds a life. I could tell you what kind of mood you were in just by the way you kicked off your shoes at the door. You knew when I needed quiet without me ever having to say a word. So why did the oxygen in the room suddenly feel different? Why did the space between us feel like it was vibrating? You're staring again, you said. Your voice wasn't teasing. It was soft, almost tentative. Am I? My voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, you said, finally looking at me. You do that when you're thinking too hard. I can practically hear the gears turning. I tried to smile. Pot meat kettle? You laughed, but then you went quiet. You pulled your knees in closer to your chest, a small protective movement. I watched as you shifted towards me, just an inch, without fully committing to a move. That's new, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. What is? You sitting closer, I replied. Usually you keep a very respectable, very disciplined friend distance. You glanced down at the floor between us, then looked back up at me. You weren't bothered by the observation, but you weren't dismissing it either. Is it? Yeah, I said, my heart sinking to a thud against my ribs. It is. You considered that for a moment, resting your head against the cushions of the couch behind us, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Maybe I'm reevaluating, you said. The word hung in the air, heavy and significant. Reevaluating what? I asked. Tried to keep my tone casual, but I think we both knew the act was over. Us, you said simply. We've always been good, easy, safe, and I love that about us. I've spent a lot of time being afraid that if I said anything, I'd mess up the best thing in my life. I don't want to mess it up either, I said quickly. You're my favorite person to do absolutely nothing with. You smiled at that, and the tension in your shoulders seemed to bleed away. But, you added, I've been noticing things lately. Things I can't unnotice. Like what? Like how I miss you 5 minutes after you leave. And how I look forward to these quiet nights more than anything else in my week. It's starting to feel like more. I swallowed hard. That sounds significant. You looked at me then, your eyes warm but searching. Does it feel significant to you? I thought about all the moments over the last few months, the way our hugs lasted a second too long, the way our laughter had softened into something more intimate, the way I had started noticing the exact different distance between our hands whenever we sat together. Yeah, I said quietly, it really does. Neither of us moved for a heartbeat. Then slowly you shifted again. This time it wasn't an accident, it was deliberate. You moved until your shoulder was resting firmly against mine. It was a simple touch, but it felt like a confession. Is this okay? You asked. It is, I said. It's very okay. I heard you exhale, a long, shaky breath of relief. Good. We stayed like that for the rest of the night. The show ended and the screen went dark, but neither of us reached for the remote. The night settled around us, thick and protective. The closeness felt different than it ever had before. It wasn't just familiar anymore. It was intentional. You said softly, your head resting on my shoulder now. If we're doing this, doing what? I asked. Whatever this is. And I could hear the smile in your voice. I'd like to do it slowly. I don't want to lose the friend part of us. I leaned my head against yours. Friends are the best at going slow. We've had plenty of practice. You laughed, and this time it was the deep, real chuckle I loved. The moment wasn't a movie scene. There were no fireworks, no swelling orchestra. It was just two people in a dim room, finally admitting that the labels they'd been using were too small for the reality that they were living. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with a shout. Sometimes it shows up as a comfort that deepens until it becomes something else entirely. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just stop pretending.